there's a document. The Biennale College is being filmed as part of a documentary. It's unlikely that a lot of this will make it into the final documentary, but there may be some of it that might be filmed a bit later. So just so you're aware.
If there's anything you would prefer us to not record, just let us know afterwards, and make sure to let our film team know. Thank you.
Yeah, so we're really excited to have Fred and Sthuthi here today. They're both graphic designers, and that we've each worked with. And I think they've both helped to develop identities for different projects using design. And we thought that would be really helpful, since all of you are kind of working with that same topic, to hear them speak about their approach and what we can learn from it. Yeah,
maybe we just introduce who they are.
Yeah, I mean, do you, Fred and Sthuthi, would you rather introduce yourselves, or should we introduce you?
Either way.
Yeah, I'll introduce Fred just a little bit. So Fred is a South African graphic designer, and he's worked quite prolifically over a number of projects, often with Leslie. So he's worked at the GSA, and more recently on the Biennale catalog and all of its graphic packages. So all the posters you see across Venice were designed by him. But yeah, he continues to work with a number of institutions. Yeah, I mean, I always find his work quite like typographical and very structured, but he plays with color also in very beautiful ways. And I think, yeah, we'll kind of work through some of his fascinations here generally, but also I think related to Venice in certain parts, which I think will be really fascinating to hear. A lot of our participants are looking at really similar things, so I think it will be great to kind of hear your perspectives on this.
Thank you.
And to introduce Sthuthi, Sthuthi is a graphic designer based in London. We are friends because we're both part of this South Asian design group that's based there. And then through that, I got to know her, and most recently we worked on this project for a new South Asia gallery in Manchester as part of Manchester Museum. And Sthuthi developed the identity and all the 2D design across the gallery, really thinking of like how to bring South Asia to life through the 2D design, including developing a kind of bespoke typeface with a type foundry, and thinking of like what materials we print on, etc. So it was like a kind of like almost like a feeling or an experience as you move through the space. And she runs her own practice with Sthuthi Ramesh Design and also Nicety Materials, but she used to also work at Pentagram.
Thank you.
So I don't know. Do either of you have a preference to go first?
I'm easy.
If each of you do your short presentation, then we'll have some time for discussion.
Yeah. Okay.
Afterwards.
Fred, maybe you can start and then I'll start. I
don't mind. But maybe I can just get it over with. Okay, let me just see. How do I do this now?
We'll just go on to mute so that there's no background noise.
Is the spelling correct here? I work with pictures and I'm struggling to write, but anyways, I just want to show you there's two parts to my presentation. I'm going to run through it very, very quickly, and maybe we can just chat about it afterwards. The first thing is I just wanted to sort of get into symbols and how we look at them and how their meaning changes. So that will be a quick first part. And then in the second part, just some of the stuff that me and Leslie has been talking about over our projects, and also how we approach things. How do we look at symbols and their meanings? And I'm particularly interested in the migration of the meaning of symbols and how they change over time and how they reappropriate it. and also within specific context, how they change their meaning. So I've done this little video just as an introduction. And the first thing I wanted to start with was a line. And basically just taking this line and trying to explore how its meaning changes depending on its context. Now, some of you might have seen similar exercises to this, but I thought it would be interesting to do this as a kind of a warm-up lap. So you can see this as a line or a dash or connecting to different ideas. It could also be subtraction, and it could also, when it multiplies into two shapes, it could become an equal sign, and it changes its meaning again once you rotate it. And then it starts changing its meaning quite radically when you start adding color to it. So it could be something like this. It could be a flag of a country. It could be a specific group that could be interpreted in different ways. It could be an affiliation to a sports team or a political group, or it could be a symbol of hope, depending on the context that it's in. When you inverse it, it becomes something else. It could become a flag, or it could become a brand. When you rotate it, it could become multiplication, or it could mean yes and no, depending on its application. There's ambiguity in that symbol that I'm quite interested in. When you multiply it by itself, it could mean something like this, or it could become a symbol for a city. When it transforms again, it becomes a tick, and we all know what the tick stands for. Okay, I'm going to go into the other part. So that's just looking at how just a simple line can transform. And I know, just hang on a second, I think, can you see the, maybe I should just close this one. Can you see this?
Yes, you see your PDF.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start with a line. And I know my pronunciation with line and lion is sometimes the same. So just bear with me. I was fascinated by, and again, this is some of these exercises we do in branding, is just a similarity between symbols and how similar they appear in specific sectors. So like, for instance, here in the automotive industry, you can see that everything is circular for obvious reasons. So from a form perspective, there's definitely similarities. In the financial sector, for instance, color plays a different role. You can see that the bulk of these colors share the same color palette. In the fashion industry, it's no different. It seems that there's two camps between serif and sans serif, but it's extraordinary for me to see that all of these brands actually look almost the same. Even when you move to the sans serif world, they all seem to be of a similar construction. And their patterning as well, it's very different. It almost becomes like a type of a camo where it's very difficult to distinguish between these different brands. I'd like to take this example. This was an interesting example for us when we started working on the AFI. We started looking at brands and different groups and what they identify with. And this Fendi logo was quite striking for me because it reminded me a little bit of another symbol, which is the Andinka symbol for slave. And it seems like there was quite an interesting correlation between the two worlds of within these different, and with these symbols that even look quite similar. So when you look at these brands and the way that they are very, very similar between Gucci and Dolce & Gabbana or wherever these brands might be, it seems like they all have a similar iconographic feel. And one of the things that we were interested in is just the origins of these symbols and the way that they're constructed. And when I looked at these symbols, it felt to me that they were quite similar to something that we are all quite familiar with. And so it's interesting to trace these constructions of these different symbols and kind of look at the configuration and tradition of them in relation to one another. So this idea of branding has definitely transformed into our popular culture. When we started developing an identity for the 3 phases of the AFI, which was basically divided into the talks, courses, and research, the branding iron seemed to be quite an interesting device that we could play on as a device that was starting to talk about some of the things that we were thinking about in the Venice Biennale. So you can see the relationship here between these 3 divisions and then how we've reappropriated it into our identity. And from that, there were a series of graphics that we created based on the branding iron. At this stage, we started looking at the Lion of Venice, and we were interested in its construction. So these forms and shapes were also sort of derived from there. So what I just quickly want to do is just quickly run through three parts of the Venice Biennale that we've been working on, and just show just some of the symbolism in these executions. And so the first one I'm going to go through is just this carnival. And if you think about some of the things that I've showed you before, maybe some of this will start to make sense. But what Leslie said in an interview was quite interesting, when she said there's a coincidence between Carnival of Venice and the African diaspora. The carnival is a moment of liberation in which slaves were free for a week. And so we know that there are many different carnivals, and I think they're always associated with perhaps, to a larger extent, with the image on the right-hand side. That there are many carnivals all over the world, and they have different meanings, and they stand for different things, and they celebrate different things. So the typography on this specific execution, I think from a public perspective, maybe there's all the things that we know about a carnival, that it's about rhythm and it's about celebration and there's movement. And so I wanted to show that in the typography. You can clearly see it feels a bit like there's some rhythm in it, and there's maybe almost sound in it. It feels like there could be drums, etc. But I had to return again to some of the other imagery, and I think from a public perspective, it was just very, very subtle. I don't think this is something that anybody necessarily picked up, and it's also something that I enjoy, is that we don't necessarily give it away, but in the configuration of that typography, there was something else there that I hope the public would have picked up, and that is that those C's on the side symbolizes the chain, and that they are broken, and that they represent freedom. So when we started working on the project for the Biennale, it was, I suppose, like all the other projects that we work on, we started to look at its symbols and its origins. And so one of the things that was really interesting for us was the lion, because we're from Africa, and the lion is a big part of our culture. It appears in many different identities, but it also appears in many other identities across the world. But this one specifically was interesting to me because of its origin. It's a tetramorph, which means that it's comprised of 4 different elements. Its original mention was in the book of Ezekiel, so it's got a very long history. What was interesting for me, of course, is that it's a winged lion, so that was really, really interesting to me. Sorry about this logo, it didn't come out correct, but you can see here how the Venice Biennale logo symbolizes this podium that the lion is standing on. I also felt that this block also felt like some kind of construction or some kind of house of some sort. So that was also interesting to me. So like I say, yeah, it's a very old symbol, and it's appeared in many different cultures. But in its configuration with Venice, it talks about St. Mark, and the first time it was used was it was the symbol of St. Mark, and who started the first Coptic church in Alexandria. So this means that this lion actually has an origin in Africa, and through a long migration, and you can read up about that, how it eventually ended up in Venice. But it had a long journey to Venice, and it has a very specific history behind it. So the fact that it came from here was interesting to us. And here's some of the earlier depictions of the story of that lion and St. Mark. When I looked at the lion the first time, initially I thought, yo, that's a really badly drawn line. But it's actually not. It's really quite beautiful when you look at it and you look close up at it and you look at some of the areas and shapes and forms within it. It's extremely fluid. It feels like it's morphing, and it feels like there's some kind of motion in it, which I thought was really, really interesting. The laboratory of the future gave immediate cues for us in terms of what this type of basic iconography should be. When you think of, you know, just the words that are locked up in laboratory of the future, laboratory and future. You immediately think of things that are on the periodic table, DNA research labs, all of those kind of things. So these things were sort of part of our discussions initially, just on the basics of what are iconography that we perhaps could use. But it was this Mercury thing that was interesting for me, because when I saw statues or the Lion Award, I realized that there's similarities between the fluidity of the lion and in other metals. So when I look at the lion now, I don't necessarily see its past anymore, you know, its origin and where it came from. I'm looking at it now, and it almost feels like something from Terminator or something from the future. It's completely fluid and metal, and it really feels to me like it's a fusion between the past and the future. So when I look at this award, yes, totally. And when I look at that, to me now, it feels like a symbol from the future rather than all of the traditions that binds it. The typography of this, as you saw before, we were interested in sort of DNA and all of that. And I was looking for a way of bringing that line into our DNA as such, or our visual language DNA. So just by rearranging the typography in a specific way, it could feel that if you start bitmapping it, it could feel like a helix or a very abstract version of a DNA pattern. But also what was fun was when you started getting interesting read-throughs here, like for instance here, future of the laboratory or future of the future was also interesting for me. So just by rearranging things, their meaning could potentially change. So from this typographic arrangement came a new visual language. And what was interesting for me here was not only that it was scientific, but it definitely had a very specific African address in terms of pattern making and some of the other visual traditions that we know. So the lion then became part of that DNA. So he started morphing with our visual language. And that's something that I really like about the way we do things on the continent, is that we can take something like this new or this international style of typography, and we can bring it into our world, and we can mix it all up and charge it with a completely different energy, and it becomes something that is our own. And so rather than focusing on its past and where it came from and how it got to Venice, we were thinking more about the potential of this line and what it could be. And so we just incorporated him into our identity. And in a way, that meant that the line was not just the symbol on a podium, but he was active and that he had a job to do. So I'm just going to share some of the executions, and you can see here how our DNA becomes part of the everyday life within Venice. And it was fun to see, but what I was also interested in is how it became part of the texture of the city and how it almost camouflaged itself within the city through just subtly using our strong geometric shapes and incorporating their DNA. So we became part of the city in a way. And yeah, so it's just filtering into the dense layers of the brickwork of the city. You can see there's a lot of similarity in terms of the color palette, but also the forms and shapes of the environment. So in a way, it kind of wants to disappear at the same time as it wants to be visible. Yeah, it was great also to work with the curatorial team, who then took the pattern and allowed it to have a new life and create shade. And I think Sarah could maybe talk a little bit more about the democratic nature of shade. But yeah, the pattern then, as I said before, the line then has a function, and it's becoming part of the identity in a very physical way. The thing that I got the most excited about was seeing how the posters in the city was used and how it interacted with the public, but also how it decayed. Venice is a very, it's a water city, so there's a lot of things decay very, very quickly. So the turn, you know, the sweet spot that it had for a moment, and it's up, and then it decays, and it becomes sort of part of the trash in a way. For me, was quite nice. I loved also just the way that everyone interacted with the identity, so that was also great. The one aspect that I felt when I started seeing the identity up in the city, and with the bridges and the canals and so on, and how these bridges connect people or connect different areas, I realized that these banners, in a way, I'm hoping that it would have connected people in their placement, but that the M and the N dashes that we used in identity did this in a similar way. I'm just going to quickly talk about college, because here it is again. I was interested in to see how I could reappropriate the lion into this, and just by rearranging it in a specific way, that maybe it could talk back to, again, these traditions of badges and logos of institutions and so on, but in a new way. So you can see the form of the badge here. When you rearrange the two lines next to one another, it became a badge again, and it became the poster that you have behind you on the wall right now. So in the end, the lion for me it's a wing symbol of imagination, creativity, and transformation. It has a history, but at the same time, its fluidity symbolizes the future. So in short, that's what that was about. Okay.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Fred.
Sorry, it was a bit.
No, it was great.
Okay.
Over to you, Sthuthi.
Yeah. Should I just go for it then, or do you want to?
Yeah, go for it, and then we can have a discussion afterwards.
All right. Okay. I'll go. Really lovely talk, by the way. It was, as a graphic designer, I just really enjoyed it. Just wanted to say that before I start my sort of talk.
Thank you.
So yeah, well, I was trying to look for an image like perfect chai time, I thought. I don't know if you know what chai time is. In India, we have nice little chai at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, but I know it's already 5 there for you guys, so it's probably wine o'clock. So let's see. Just to sort of give a little bit of history to what I did and how I've sort of set up my own practice. I'm Sthuthi. I'm a creative director based in London. I set up my practice in 2019. I worked for all these amazing places. And then I became a mom in 2016. And also I was just trying to see, after doing all these like amazing projects for global clients, I was wondering, what is my identity? How do I sort of continue my career after becoming a mom as well? And there was sort of a niche I felt that was missing in this whole graphic design world, where, you know, focusing on South Asian design. We were known for like textile, we're known for like poetry, literature, like any part of cultural sort of disciplines. But when it came to graphic design, we were always known to be kitsch or become very cliched in terms of overbearing design and so on. So I was trying to see, I personally was influenced by European design, and I just wanted to see if there was a South Asian graphic design sort of language that we can start creating in a more fresh, confident, and exciting way. So that's where my sort of practice is focused on, but also creating identities and any sort of graphics, maybe digital, print, books, to websites, to art design, name it. We are, you know, multidisciplinary graphic design practice. So I want to talk, I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll rush through this. This is one of the projects that I worked alongside with Manijeh and Studio C102 and Mobile Architects. It's called South Asia Gallery by Manchester Museum, and in partnership with British Museum. So this is like a first permanent gallery in the UK to celebrate like the lived experiences and contributions of South Asian diaspora. So in the UK, basically, like I said, it's first kind of a permanent gallery. And the stories were also sort of co-curated by a group of collectives from the South Asian diasporas. There were educators, musicians, journalists to artists, so a wide range of people. So you basically mean that I had, I don't know, 15 plus 5, 20 clients to please. So this is South Asia Gallery. I just want to show you like the whole final output, but I also am going to take you through a journey, how we came to this identity. So when Manijeh brought me into this project, they asked me to create this confident, non-cliche, not stereotypical graphic language for a South Asia gallery that had to be fresh and break the norm of like South Asia, you know, South Asian sort of visual cliches that people are used to. So like any project, I start my projects with like research. So when you're working on a Western project, it's just so easy, or like any other client projects that I work here in London, it's so easy to find resources because it's well documented. But here you have to sort of dig through to find these nuances and surprising things that can be applied to your design. So this is a type foundry was based in Mumbai, and I found this like a type specimen that was created in the 1930s. So you can see like a movable type, rubber stamping, sort of a dual colored typeface that was created in the 1930s, which was also important for this particular project because we wanted to make sure if we are creating a South Asia gallery identity, it had to be of that period where most of the countries were together. So we don't want to focus just on India or just on Pakistan or just on Sri Lanka. So it had to, bring all these countries together. So we thought this era of research was quite an important element. And so the concept I started thinking about was a movable modular type. What is the South Asia Gallery? It's going to be in Manchester. So you also have these fabric shops or any kind of shop, South Asian shops in Manchester under these industrial brick buildings. So that probably will be South Asia Gallery. So I was trying to figure out how can we come up with a word mark for this gallery. And further, when we started researching, we also found this stencil reference across South Asia, where you have in train stations, it's hand-drawn stencils written in like different languages, or it's translated in English. And it's almost like everyday design in South Asia. And it's also resonated with the journey that probably the diasporas from South Asia sort of started off before landing in Manchester or in the UK. So I partnered with like Universal Thirst, a Icelandic and a India-based type foundry that focus on South Asian scripts. So when I started thinking, okay, we need to bring this movable modular type to become a bespoke typeface. What is it when we say it's 2023? Like how do we bring it to today's day and age? So we had to like modernize it, but at the same time keep the true essence of it. And also it had to be a multilingual word mark. So as you may know, in India you have, or in South Asia, you have so many different languages. So we started experimenting. I think Manijeh also hasn't seen a lot of these. So, but I thought it's nice to show this in this process. So we started off with like a couple of different stencil type. How can we modernize it, but also keep that Gujarati type foundry essence quite till today, like, sort of keep that essence in this design. So we came, I personally felt that the condensed version was still how I envisioned, or like how the Gujarati type foundries sort of essence was there. So you can see all the options, and then we go into a process with the type foundry to try and test what happens when the type word mark is completely condensed, when it is completely expanded, or you call this the variable type. So when you have different formats, the same modules, but in different weights. So you can still see, the first option still was the most relevant, but I think when you're briefing a graphic designer or any sort of branding agency, it's also important to see all these different options, just so you know where you are is the right right space. And so this is where we landed, and I quite like the idea of that dual personalities, or the dual colored type that was there in the Gujarati type foundry specimen. So we tried to bring that back here, also trying to show this diversity in the colors and the South Asian culture, but it sort of brought it out in a more confident and in a more contemporary manner. So you can start to see how the same module can be multiplied into 7 different languages. It was 7 different languages because those were the main languages spoken by the diaspora in Manchester. So the most difficult one was the Arabic one because it's written from left to right. But yeah, so this was sort of the outcome. And you can see all the scripts are different. Bengali is different, Hindi is different, Urdu is different, Punjabi is different, Gujarati is different, Tamil is different. But it had to be a module. It's almost like a magic module to sort of bring them all together. But it works in Latin as long as also it works in different other languages. And again, when you're working on exhibition designs or architectural projects, I guess like accessibility and legibility becomes a very key point. So we worked with like accessibility, a team to make sure this is accessible. And we were like very, very nervous that it wouldn't pass the accessibility test because we all love the design so much, but it did. So we were very pleased. The colors, so we had to just tweak a few colors, sort of just to make sure that there was enough contrast in the letters and the colors that we were applying. And these were some of just the rollouts, just to show the client or the museum that it's an expandable identity. So it just doesn't, it can be, you know, created in different formats. And also, how do you show this multi-lingual aspect within the graphic forms or the formats? You can see how they start to sort of flex. And then we started applying these graphics to the actual museum itself. So this was when we opened in 2023, February. They had this really nice brass and multicolored 3D letters placed on the entrance. And this was the entrance of the gallery where you had Sync Twins mural on either side. And you can walk in and you had 6 anthologies beautifully sort of written alongside with the co-curators. And Manijeh also was a big part of writing all these beautiful interpretations. And also the colors that I started choosing was quite intuitive, because in India, or in South Asia, when people wear their clothes, they don't like really think about, you know, the colors they're wearing. Is it going to match with this? It's very, very intuitive. So that's something that I wanted to bring out, but also not overpowering the object around it, just sort of supporting it and helping the object shine. And you can see how they start to sort of work in alignment with that particular anthology. And this was sound, music, and dance. And again, like materiality is very important. We have a material platform called Nicety Materials, where you can look up for different materials like paper to, you know, if you are a DIY person, like with wood to metal and so on. So, you know, material research has been quite a key ingredient to our practice. And this, they wanted at the South Asia Gallery, they wanted a flexible system where they can update these new stories and tombstones and interpretations. So I thought it would be an amazing way to add this khadi paper. Khadi is like a hand-woven thread, which is then made into a fabric. And then all the leftover cotton rag is then made into a paper, so made by women in South India, almost the area where I come from. And you can see they're stuck on the wall to dry. So it's all naturally made. And luckily we had a distributor here in the UK, so we were able to access this, and we like digitally screen printed this white text onto the paper, so they can update it every often whenever they have a new object. Yeah, some more examples of these papers. Yeah, so I just like don't want to take a lot of time, and I just want to make sure that there's enough time for questions, and this is one project that I've been working for the past 2 years, which was nicely launched in February, and thanks to Manijeh as well for inviting me on this project. Thank you. If there's any questions, please go ahead. I'll stop sharing now.
That's absolutely gorgeous.
Oh, thank you.
Sthuthi, I feel like we've done a paid partnership. I mean, I guess we have.
That is just beautiful. Just the ease with which that type moves between the different.
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
Maybe actually, so maybe to start with, because both of you as experts in graphic design compared to us will see each other's work differently. We were wondering if you had any questions for each other.
Oh wow. I was so blown away by Fred's talk, like how the detail of everything. So I was like, it was how sort of different for me. The question is, how are you trying to adapt as a designer from a different, like, you know, I'm sure you've been here for a few years, but how is the current day in graphic design sort of or the way people look at symbols, or like all these chat GPT, all these new things coming up, how are you trying to keep up with all this is something that I'm curious about.
Yeah. I think for me, it's just to be aware of it.
Yeah.
And I am working now with Leslie on another project as well, where we sort of rethinking things. And I did a bit of a desktop research on what's happening in graphic design. And in the end, I just thought, wow, it's so crazy because it's just everything and everything. It's just so much. And so I think it's just when I see that, I just go back to my basics and I try and build on that. And I try and stay relevant by just making sure that I understand who the audience is, you know, and just make sure that I can communicate to them, even if it's not in a contemporary voice. But yeah, it's I don't know I would like to ask you the same question.
I would say,
because you're also in the center of
yes,
that world, you know, where it's being developed. And I also saw, you know, some of the companies that you've worked with, like Moving Brands, you know, those kind of companies are at the edge of all of this. So I'm curious to hear from you as well, where how you find yourself within this world.
It's interesting because I've been having my practice for the past 4 years, but also I recently worked as a creative director at a studio, well-known studio, and I was just thinking that they've abandoned InDesign and Illustrator completely. It's all Figma. So for me to keep up with, so even designing is happening in Figma. So I'm just for me to keep up with that was a bit difficult, but at the same time, I feel like I'm not going to be scared of these things, like exactly the way you said. As long as you know you're able to create something new with enough research and enough ideas, I think these two are your weapons, and I just think we can just conquer this, but by also not being afraid of these things, but how can we bring those collaborate with these things and sort of see if we can come up with something new? Like, it's exciting.
Exactly.
And I'm not so afraid, to be honest, but learning is a bit hectic now at this age. I feel just abandoning Illustrator and InDesign and just going to Figma completely is a bit like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm ready for it, but yeah,
but it's very exciting.
Yeah
Sorry,
we'll let you guys sort of ask us any questions.
Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, you might have to come here.
I must say, AI also saves a lot of time. Working out things, reorganizing texts and things like that.
Hi, hello. Thank you both for very interesting presentations.
I need to speak up.
Can you hear me? Hello?
No. Yeah. Now I
speak louder.
Here? Okay, so thank you for the very interesting presentations. I think my question is to Fred. Can you explain more the connection between the lion as a symbol and then Mercury? Was it Mercury element that you used? So the connection between those two.
Yes, thank you. So one of the things that we started thinking of immediately was some of the resources in on the continent, mining, metallics, those kind of industries, but also the line is always presented in a metallic form, apart from its print version, which is the red one. But the award is always in metal. And what's interesting is that that lion that's on that in the square near St. Mark is actually made up of 3 different types of metals as it's been restored over the years. And so this was also something that we started thinking about, just the metallic nature of that, but also in a lab, that was just something that I saw, and it sparked that idea of saying, but hang on, there's similarities. And I think that's something that I'm always looking for, is like saying, okay, well, here's the world of a lab where there's different elements, and metal is one of them. But we know that we've been talking about mining in Africa. There's a lot of controversy around that, and there's a lot of social issues around mining and so forth. And yeah, I suppose also production, that a lot of it was also taken from here and somewhere else. So the metallic nature of it became very important. And if you look at the catalog, you'll see that the one catalog is actually printed in silver. And a lot of the posters, when you look around in Venice, if you look close up, you'll see that it's not gray, it's actually silver. That was, I don't know if this is answering the question, but yeah, it's got to do with again, something from here, and that there's a connection between the two worlds. But I was very interested in the fluidity of that line in terms of its metal. Like mercury, it moves and it morphs. You can never quite hold it. And so the line, when I look at it now, it's not static at all. I see it as something that's ready to morph into something else.
It's almost like a dot going on a walk, isn't it? Like a line is moving as well.
Yeah.
At the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Fred, like, just to comment on that, I think the way that you work with material, like digitally, and I guess like you manipulating this physical material digitally, I find really interesting. But also I think kind of changes the brand that you're talking about, and the lion also, I mean, they're all symbols that you kind of interrupt a little bit, or they become something new in this kind of splicing or like re-transformation into a different kind of material form. Which, yeah, I think it feels for me like a political argument almost that you make, kind of subtly.
It is. Yeah. No, it is for sure. And it's subtle because if we think about the lion and its origins and how it got to Venice, it wasn't a very easy move. So, we can get into the politics of that. But I'm going to leave that to you to research.
I was wondering how each of you, if there's a way you approach the project, especially the 2 projects you presented, like Fred, in your case, bringing a kind of South African sensibility to Venice through the kind of common ground of the lion, but also the line. And then Sthuthi, I think when you were looking at like the way this stencil typeface appears in the public realm as a kind of everyday encounter with typography, that wouldn't be cliched, etc. But I was just wondering, like, in your wider practice, like, where do you seek inspiration, and like how does like the way you've approached the projects you've shown us today become a methodology?
Fred, do you want to go?
No, you go.
I'll
I'll think about it so long.
I don't know. I'm going to be very intuitive and sort of spontaneous, I guess. Like I said, it's been a struggle when we do like South Asian projects. Like, it's to go deeper into any research in terms of the graphic design sector. But there are loads of documents and loads of resources, but it's just not been documented well. That's something that I'm also, as a practice, sort of trying to see if we can bring that to life. But at the same time, I think keeping your eyes and ears open to anything that's available to you, like you know, when you're driving through, I visit India, my family, every year, or at least once a year, and sort of trying to, like, the things that I hadn't seen when I was there has now becoming like invaluable for me, because every day I saw a Rangoli pattern, or like, you know, the rice powder pattern every morning, but now I look at it with like hawk eye, just to make sure, have I missed something? Is there anything interesting that I could pull out? So I think it's just keeping everything open, and trying to investigate, like trying to see the same things that you've seen for probably the past 20 years, but you've missed that one thing, probably is how I would look at things, and sort of apply it onto my projects as well. I don't know if that answered your question, Manijeh.
That also resonates with me. You know, I think what's interesting what you're saying is returning back. We had a visit in Accra, for instance, where we collected color, for instance. And when I came back here, I started seeing similarities, and I started realizing why the color is a certain tone. So it's just, you know, being aware of your environment and constantly absorbing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be always books, I guess, but you know, as much as I love books, but it's also yeah, just looking at it again probably sort of helps you.
Yeah. For me, it's very much about conversation. Before I start a project, it is really just speaking to whoever I'm working with and getting to know one another and understanding where they come from, and really getting into understanding what is important to them and what symbols they resonate with, and then messing with it, you know, and bringing it into a graphic environment. We had, when I started off, my art director the first time always said, how can you survive as a graphic designer within a 1 meter radius from you? And I still do that. I feel like if I have a project, I can take what's around me and make something of it, and deconstruct it and make something new out of it. And I think that's something that I try and do all the time, is I try and absorb things and change it and make it something else.
I really like
a lot of it's just walking and looking. Venice is a great place for that.
Yeah, I really like this idea that you kind of develop a project in a 1 meter radius, whether that's like while you're on a trip somewhere or in the context of the project. Sthuthi, I know you have to go soon, so maybe as like a last question, if no one else has one, I'm just wondering like how much you feel each of you, your individual identity shapes the work you do in your practice. Like obviously, you know, all the projects that you work on are South Asian, more like the exception rather than the rule. But obviously there's a distinct quality you bring to the way you approach your projects. And similarly, Fred, I think having encountered so much of your work internationally as well as in Joburg, I was just curious how, yeah, for both of you, how much you feel your individual identity shapes the way you work.
Yeah, I think my stuff, I personally feel like I have this tendency for organized chaos, which also comes from my background. I sort of have that within me, and it just sort of sometimes works. Not all the time, but also I've realized over the past years, without even knowing that there's this, I didn't know that people had a problem, or designers had a problem with like colors, in the sense that how they choose colors, or how they how they bring these colors together to create a form. For me, that comes quite intuitively. I don't know, is it because that's one thing I take on with me as a badge, I would say, because it just comes to me very intuitively, and that's something that I've heard from outsiders rather than me realizing it myself. So I mean, I know it's a cliche when you say, oh, South Asia colors, but also bringing those colors in a more contemporary manner. And then like any project that I have worked on, even if it is South Asian projects or other, you know, when I work with Western projects here with my different clients, it just comes very naturally and instinctively. So yeah, that's one of my identity badge that I would carry.
I feel, yeah, it's very difficult to say. I think, yes, I mean, I grew up in a certain way where we're exposed to the international style, and there was a specific graphic language that was constantly pushed down your throat. I think if you look in Johannesburg as well, if you look at the typography that separated us, that is very much based on the international style. But I think also Joburg shapes me. And I think that it's not so much what I bring to it, but how it changes me. And so I feel that design in a way has given me a voice, where before I didn't feel like I could say anything. It has now given me an opportunity to say something and to be relevant in that way and make a statement. Yeah, so I think more than what I bring to it, it's more what it gives me. And I form my identity through that. So I wear many different hats. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, it's also one of the thing is, like, you know, when you say South Asian design, you know, you always have this, you know, cliches, stereotypes, and so on. I think I don't know, I feel like a lot of designers have now sort of started to see that it's just not that. You can see South Asian design in a much more fresh and contemporary manner.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you both so much. This has been really inspiring.
No, thank you
for having us.
And it's been great to have you here virtually with us.
Next time we'll come there. Fly us
Yeah.
there.
Yes, yes.
That would be amazing.
Exactly. You've got to feel this heat yourself. But yeah, obviously you should follow what the unit is doing on Instagram. Our account is Heist_outside. If you don't follow it already. And we keep posting like the different events we're doing. We're projecting a lot in the city, so like inserting our imagery or anti-imagery onto Venice. And yeah, we have these presents. We have another week and a half to go. So but watch this space.
Yes.
Sounds really exciting there.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Pleasure. Nice
Bye.
meeting you all. Bye.
Bye, Fred. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.